Sir, you match the description of a robbery suspect. Hands behind your back. The officer's voice was sharp, aggressive. Master Sergeant Tom Harlan stood still, holding his grandson Eli's hand. They had just left the ice cream shop. Officer, this is a mistake, Tom said calmly. The officer didn't care. He raised his taser. Don't resist me, old man. A second later, Tom hit the pavement, twitching, stunned. Eli screamed, collapsing beside him. Then the air shifted. A Marine helicopter roared overhead. Armored Humvees rolled down Main Street. Marines fanned out. And when Colonel Benjamin Cross stepped from the lead vehicle and saw who was on the ground, he froze. Because you don't tase a legend, not the man who trained warriors. And when the Marines come back for one of their own, they don't ask permission. Tom Harlan never looked for attention. He never had to. The kind of man he was, the kind forged in silence, sweat, and fire, spoke volumes without a single word. He had served 32 years in the United States Marine Corps, most of them with Force Recon, the elite of the elite. From the humid, unforgiving jungles of Vietnam's final days to the scorching sands of the Middle East, Tom moved like a shadow, quiet, disciplined, deadly. He was the one who went in before anyone else did, and the one who made sure his men came home. He'd been wounded 3 times, once by shrapnel, once by a gunshot that should have ended his career, and once in a helicopter crash that left him walking with a subtle limp no one dared ask about. For his service, Tom was awarded 3 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with Valor, and the Navy Cross, one of the highest honors in the U.S. military. But you wouldn't have known it by looking at him, because Tom never bragged. He didn't hang medals on his wall. He kept them in a dusty shoebox in the back of his closet, next to a folded flag and the letters he wrote to his wife, Evelyn, during his last deployment. She was the only one who knew everything, the weight he carried, the men he lost, the ones he couldn't save. Evelyn was his light, his peace, his anchor in a world full of ghosts. And when cancer took her 6 years ago, Tom didn't speak of it. He simply stopped going to the VA barbecues, stopped sitting near the front at church, stopped laughing, except for Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, Tom picked up his grandson Eli from school. It started as a favor to his daughter, who worked late shifts, but it became something sacred. They'd walk down Maple Avenue hand in hand to the same old ice cream parlor called the Sweet Spot. Eli always got the same thing, chocolate chip with rainbow sprinkles. Tom got plain vanilla. They sat on the same bench, talked about superheroes and school bullies and why the clouds move so slowly. It was the only time Tom smiled now, the only time he let his guard down. He wore the same outfit almost every time. Khaki slacks, a navy polo, and an old beige baseball cap with the faded insignia of the 1st Recon Battalion. Most people mistook him for a retiree on a slow walk. They had no idea the man with the gentle eyes had once led reconnaissance teams into enemy territory with nothing but a radio and sheer nerve. Tom didn't care if they knew. He wasn't trying to be anyone's hero. He just wanted to be Eli's grandfather, just wanted to make it to the next Tuesday. And that's the cruel thing about what happened. Because when Officer Mallory shouted and drew his taser, he didn't just humiliate a man who had given his life to service. He shattered the one day Tom had left to feel human. It was the kind of afternoon that made you forget the world had ever been harsh. The air was crisp, laced with the first hints of falling leaves and chimney smoke. Main Street glowed under a golden autumn sun, and laughter echoed from the nearby playground. Tom Harlan and his grandson Eli had just stepped out of the Sweet Spot, the familiar bell above the door chiming behind them. Eli clutched a double scoop of chocolate chip in a cone nearly as big as his hand. His other hand rested securely in Tom's. They walked at an easy pace, their shadows stretching long across the sidewalk. Eli was mid-sentence, comparing Superman's strength to that of a bulldozer when the world shifted. Without warning, a police cruiser screeched into the curb, lights flashing violently against the storefront glass. The tires hadn't even fully stopped spinning before 2 officers jumped out. Young, tense, already aggressive. One of them, Officer Trent Mallory, moved with the energy of someone looking for a fight. The other, Officer Kyle Reeves, looked less sure, his eyes darting nervously, hand hesitating near his belt. "Stop right there!" Mallory barked, his voice slicing through the peaceful street like broken glass. Hands where I can see them. Tom instinctively pulled Eli behind him, not out of fear, but out of protection. He stood tall, spine straight, hand gentle yet firm on the boy's shoulder. Is there a problem, officer? Tom asked, calm but wary. Mallory stepped closer, his tone accusing, and already decided. We received a report of shoplifting. Convenience store, 1 block over. Suspect is an elderly white male, gray hair, ball cap, accompanied by a small child. Use the kid to distract the clerk. Sound familiar, Grandpa? Tom blinked, stunned. That's impossible. We've been at the ice cream shop the past 20 minutes. Mallory scoffed, looking Tom up and down with thinly veiled contempt. Yeah, you fit the profile. Perfectly. Eli, sensing the shift in energy, tightened his grip on Tom's side, his ice cream forgotten. His lip trembled. Tom felt the old instinct rising in him. Not anger, but assessment. He scanned the posture, tone, stance, weapons. These men weren't here to listen. They were here to enforce. Right or wrong didn't matter now. Officer, Tom said, trying to de-escalate. This is a misunderstanding. I'm willing to cooperate, but please, don't frighten my grandson. Mallory's face hardened. The only misunderstanding is you thinking you can use a kid as cover. Turn around, hands behind your back. Tom didn't move. I've done nothing wrong, and I will not be treated like a criminal in front of this child. Reeves shifted uneasily, his hand inching toward his taser, but never drawing it. Mallory, however, was already past the point of reason. He stepped forward again. Resisting, huh? Figures. You people think you're untouchable. Last chance. Hands behind your back, or I'll assist you. Please don't hurt my grandpa, Eli whispered, barely holding back tears. Tom's jaw clenched. Not in defiance, but in heartbreak. Officer, he said, voice steady, you're making a mistake. But Mallory didn't want explanations. He wanted compliance. And in his mind, the line between the two no longer existed. Officer, Tom said again, firmer this time but still controlled. I'm holding the hand of a frightened child. I will answer your questions, but not like this. Lower your weapon. His voice didn't shake. It was the same voice that once calmed a platoon under fire, that steadied men before jumping into darkness. But Officer Mallory wasn't a Marine. He wasn't trained to recognize quiet strength. All he saw was an old man who wasn't immediately obeying his commands. You think I'm bluffing? Mallory snapped. His right hand jerked the yellow taser from his belt. Last warning. Tom didn't flinch. I am not resisting. I am protecting my grandson. Beside him, Eli gripped his shirt tightly, his small hands trembling, tears forming in the corners of his wide, terrified eyes. Don't resist me, old man, Mallory shouted. And then, without another word, without giving anyone time to breathe, he fired. The twin barbs of the taser hit Tom squarely in the chest. Electricity surged through him like a lightning strike. His knees buckled instantly. His back arched. His grip on Eli's shoulder loosened as his body convulsed violently and collapsed onto the concrete. No! Eli screamed. He dropped his ice cream and fell to his knees beside his grandfather, grabbing at his arm. Grandpa! Grandpa! Tom lay on the pavement, twitching. His eyes fluttered, the shock having knocked the breath out of him. For a man who had survived combat zones, this was different. This was humiliation. Not in battle, but on a sidewalk. Not in a war zone, but in front of his grandson. A few feet away, Officer Kyle Reeves stood frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He hadn't expected Mallory to actually pull the trigger. His eyes flicked between the fallen man and the sobbing child, his own hand still hovering near his holstered taser. He had done nothing, and now he didn't know what to do. Around them, civilians had started to gather. A young woman with a baby stroller gasped. An elderly couple stopped mid-step. 2 teenagers pulled out their phones. They had missed the beginning, but they caught the end. He just tased that old man, someone shouted. He had a kid with him, cried another. The phones came up like rifles, pointed, steady, recording. Mallory, seemingly oblivious to the growing outrage, marched forward, crouched beside Tom's still twitching body, and grabbed one of his wrists. Should have complied, he muttered as he reached for his cuffs. Eli pushed at his hands. Stop! Leave him alone. Mallory shoved the child aside roughly. Kid, back up before I call social services. Officer Reeves stepped forward, finally speaking. Trent, maybe we should wait. We follow protocol, Mallory barked. Suspect resisted. Taser deployed. Case closed. Tom groaned, his muscles struggling to respond after the blast of current. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Eli clutched his grandfather's shirt and cried, his face red and wet with tears. And that's when it happened. The moment the street changed. A low, unmistakable thump, thump, thump began echoing from above. Helicopter rotors. Then the deep, mechanical growl of approaching engines. Military engines. Not police. Mallory looked up, confused. The crowd looked down the street. Someone whispered, "What the hell?" They had no idea what was coming, but Tom did. Somewhere through the haze of pain and static still pulsing in his limbs, he recognized the sound. The Marines were coming. The sound grew louder, heavier. It wasn't the whining siren of another squad car. It was deeper, rhythmic, familiar to some, terrifying to others. A Huey helicopter, green, sleek, and marked clearly with the insignia of the United States Marine Corps, roared into view above Main Street. Its rotors churned the air into a frenzy, scattering loose papers, autumn leaves, and the composure of every bystander. A moment later, the first Humvee came into sight, then another, then a third, rolling through the intersection without hesitation, not slowing for traffic, not stopping for lights. These vehicles didn't need permission. They brought their own. Within seconds, the peaceful street outside the ice cream shop became a staging ground. Civilians backed away instinctively, phones still recording, but voices quiet now, overtaken by awe and confusion. And then, the Marines stepped out. From each Humvee, they moved quickly but with absolute discipline. Combat boots hitting pavement in unison, gear rustling with precision. They wore standard-issue camouflage utilities, body armor, and helmets. No weapons were drawn, but none were needed. Their very presence was a show of power. 8 Marines broke off in coordinated formation, forming a silent perimeter around the scene. A second group moved to gently direct civilians to safety, their tone calm but non-negotiable. One Marine crouched beside the fallen Tom Harlan, immediately checking his pulse and vitals, while another knelt beside Eli to comfort him. Officer Mallory stumbled back, instinctively reaching for his badge, as if it could shield him from what he was witnessing. "What the? Who authorized this?" he shouted over the roar of rotors and engines. No one answered him, because at that moment, the rear door of the command Humvee opened. Out stepped a tall, lean man with silver at his temples and the glint of command in his eyes. His uniform was pressed, his boots polished. A silver eagle gleamed on his collar. Colonel Benjamin Cross. His reputation had long preceded him. Among Marines, his name was spoken with reverence and a trace of fear. He was a battlefield strategist, a strict disciplinarian, and a fierce protector of those who had served under him. But more than that, he was a man who never forgot a face, especially not the face of the man who'd once pulled him from a burning vehicle during a joint operation in Kandahar 2 decades ago. His face was hard as steel as he scanned the scene. The twitching form of Tom Harlan, the crying boy, the 2 police officers frozen in shock, and the ring of Marines now controlling the block. He approached without speaking. His boots thudded sharply on the pavement, the only sound beneath the helicopter's fading rotors. He stopped directly in front of Officer Mallory. "What exactly is going on here?" he asked, his voice low, even, but deadly. Mallory, eyes wide and sweat beginning to form on his brow, tried to assert himself. "Colonel, sir, we were responding to a call. Shoplifting suspect. Match the description." He resisted. Colonel Cross tilted his head slightly. "Resisted? You tased an unarmed elderly man in front of a child." He looked down at Tom, then to the Marine beside him, who had just confirmed a pulse and was beginning to remove the taser prongs from his chest. The Marine looked up. "Sir, it's Master Sergeant Harlan." Cross froze. For just one moment, the rigid control slipped from his face. His eyes widened in disbelief. He stepped forward, kneeling beside the man who had once trained him, who had stood with him in fire and smoke. He placed a hand gently on Tom's shoulder. "Tom," he said softly, "it's Ben. You're all right. We're here." Tom stirred faintly, his breathing shallow but present. Colonel Cross turned back to Mallory. His voice now had an edge like a drawn blade. "You assaulted Master Sergeant Thomas Harlan, a decorated Force Recon Marine, 30 years of service. Navy Cross, 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star with Valor, a man who trained half of the Marines standing on the street right now." Mallory opened his mouth, but no words came. Colonel Cross took a step closer. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "And you tased him, over an ice cream trip." The street was silent, except for the faint clicking of phone cameras and the occasional sniffle from Eli, now being comforted by a young Marine who handed him a canteen and a challenge coin. Justice had arrived, not with sirens, but with silence, boots, and memory. And the look in Colonel Cross's eyes made it clear. This wasn't over. One of the Marines who had been kneeling beside the injured man suddenly looked up, his gloved hand resting lightly on Tom's chest as he felt for steady breath. "Colonel Cross, sir," he said, eyes wide with recognition. "It's him. That's Master Sergeant Thomas Harlan." Everything stopped. Colonel Benjamin Cross, hardened, decorated, and rarely shaken, visibly froze. The name hit him like a gut punch, not out of fear, but out of awe, of memory, of debt. He moved quickly, dropping to one knee beside the fallen man, with none of the ceremony that often accompanied his rank. His polished boots scuffed the pavement as he leaned in, eyes scanning the familiar weathered face now pale and twitching with the aftershocks of electricity. "My God," he murmured, placing a firm hand on Tom's shoulder. "Tom, it's Ben. I'm here. You're going to be all right." Tom groaned faintly. His eyes fluttered open for a brief second before rolling back. The taser had done more than stun him. It had humiliated him, stripped him down in front of his grandson and the world. But now something was shifting. "Get the medic over here now," Cross ordered, his voice low but with unmistakable urgency. "And get those damn cuffs off him. Immediately." Pornalud, the Marine who had recognized Tom, nodded sharply, pulling out a cuff key and undoing the restraints from Tom's wrists. Another Marine waved toward a Humvee, where a Navy corpsman sprinted into action, kit already in hand. Officer Mallory took a step forward, sputtering. He resisted arrest. He matched the... "Silence!" Cross cut him off, his voice cold and steady. "You've said enough." As the cuffs dropped away from Tom's wrists, Colonel Cross turned to face the 2 officers, his back straight, eyes like steel. "Do you even know who you put your hands on today?" Neither officer replied. Cross didn't wait for an answer. "You tased Master Sergeant Thomas Harlan. He's not just some old man on a street corner. He's a legend." The word wasn't used lightly. Cross stood taller now, as if addressing a formation. 32 years in the Marine Corps, Force Recon, Navy Cross, 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star with Valor. He led teams through missions we don't even put in textbooks. He saved lives, mine included. And you assaulted him in front of his grandson over an ice cream cone. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd of civilians, many of whom had been recording since the moment the Marines arrived. The scene had become something larger now, justice unfolding in real time. Tom stirred again, groaning as the corpsman gently examined the site where the taser barbs had pierced through his shirt. Eli knelt beside him, holding his hand tightly, his tear-streaked face still red, but calmer now that help had arrived. Colonel Cross knelt again, brushing the back of Tom's hand with his palm. "You're safe, Tom," he said quietly. "We've got you." To the corpsman, he added, "Stabilize him. If he insists on not going to a hospital, we'll take him back to base." "Yes, sir," the medic replied. Colonel Cross turned again to the crowd, then to the Marines around him. "We don't leave our own behind. Not in war, not in peace." And then for a brief moment, he looked back at Mallory. "You didn't just fail in judgment," Cross said. "You failed in decency, in humanity." The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. In that moment, everyone saw Tom Harlan not as a suspect, not even just as a veteran, but as something more. A protector, a teacher, a man who had carried this nation on his back and had been brought to his knees by those who should have protected him, but not for long. Because when the Marines arrived, they made damn sure the world remembered who he was. The flashing lights of yet another police vehicle tore through the uneasy calm, arriving with far less force than the convoy of Marines that had come before it. The cruiser skidded slightly as it stopped, and out stepped Police Chief Harold Burns, graying, portly, his badge catching the sun just enough to signal authority, though today it meant very little. He pushed his way through the crowd, jaw clenched, confusion etched across his face as he took in the impossible scene. Humvees, Marines in formation, a downed elderly man being treated by a Navy corpsman, and two of his officers standing to the side like schoolboys awaiting punishment. "Colonel Cross?" Burns called out, approaching with forced urgency. "I received a call about an officer-involved incident. What's going on here?" Colonel Benjamin Cross didn't speak, not immediately. He locked eyes with the chief, then jerked his head toward the command Humvee behind him. "We'll talk," Cross said, "privately." There was no mistaking the tone. It wasn't a suggestion. Chief Burns followed the colonel without argument, disappearing into the dark interior of the Humvee. No one ever knew exactly what was said inside, but those who caught a glimpse of the chief as he exited 10 minutes later said he looked like a man who'd just been read his own obituary. His face had turned several shades paler, and his shoulders slumped as he walked back toward his officers. Mallory still trying to look composed, Reeves staring at the ground. Chief Burns stopped in front of them. His voice was flat. "Remove your badges and weapons, both of you, now!" Mallory's face twisted. "What?" "Chief, this is a misunderstanding." Burns didn't flinch. "That's an order, Officer Mallory." Mallory's jaw worked soundlessly for a second before he finally unfastened his badge and sidearm. Reeves followed silently, his hands trembling as he handed over his own gear. "Officer Mallory," Burns said, turning to face him squarely, "you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Internal Affairs will conduct interviews, but based on what I've seen and what's already online, you'll be facing formal charges: assault, misuse of force, possible civil rights violations." He turned to Reeves. "You're reassigned to administrative duty, desk only. Mandatory de-escalation and ethics retraining, effective immediately." Mallory's mouth moved again, but he had nothing left to say. The scene had changed. What had started as a confrontation was now a reckoning. Meanwhile, civilians who had filmed the entire incident were already uploading clips. Within an hour, social media had erupted. Hashtags like Justice for Tom, Marine Legend Tased, and Respect Our Veterans began trending nationwide. The video was hard to watch. It showed Tom Harlan standing calmly, asking to protect his grandson. It showed the officer's aggression, the taser firing, the fall, and then the Marines, the helicopter, the colonel's arrival. It looked less like a routine street encounter and more like a scene from a war movie. Local news picked up the story within hours. National outlets followed by morning. Every headline echoed the same theme: decorated veteran tased by local police. Marines intervene. Veterans organizations across the country issued statements of support for Tom. The VFW, the American Legion, and dozens of advocacy groups called for systemic change. Retired officers and generals appeared on news segments, condemning what had happened. But perhaps most striking of all were the comments from regular citizens. People from every state wrote letters, posted messages, and left voicemails at the police department. Some were former Marines. Some were just fathers, grandfathers, teachers, anyone who recognized injustice when they saw it. "I don't care who you are," one woman wrote. "You don't do that to a man like Tom Harlan. You don't do that to anyone." By the end of the week, Officer Trent Mallory had been charged with felony assault and dereliction of duty. His employment with the force was terminated. Officer Kyle Reeves remained on suspension while undergoing further review. Chief Burns, under immense public pressure, announced his early retirement within a month. Tom, for his part, refused a hospital bed. "I've slept in worse places," he muttered with a faint smirk, though his limp was more pronounced now, and his hands still trembled slightly when no one was looking. But he wasn't alone, because when the Marines showed up, they didn't just come to stop a wrong. They came to stand for something right, and the town, no, the country had seen it. Tom Harlan didn't ask to go back to base, But when Colonel Cross offered, he didn't say no either. The corpsman helped him into the back of a Humvee, slowly, carefully. Tom's legs were still shaky from the taser, but his back was straight and his eyes were alert. Eli clung tightly to his hand, refusing to let go, and not a single Marine questioned it. They brought him not to a hospital, but to the officers' quarters at Camp Blake, the nearby Marine installation where Colonel Cross was commanding a joint training group. It was quiet, respectful, and clean. The kind of place where men stood up when you walked in. Not because of your rank, but because of your name. Tom didn't want to make a fuss. He asked for hot tea and a blanket, not painkillers. He waved off the corpsman's repeated suggestions for a full medical workup. "I've had worse," he said with a dry chuckle. "Got shot once in Kandahar and still finished the patrol." But what he did accept, without argument, was the quiet presence of Marines who rotated through the guest room just to check on him. Some stood in silence. Some offered stories. All of them had been trained, directly or indirectly, by the man now sitting in their colonel's spare chair, sipping tea like it was just another Tuesday. And for Eli, everything changed. The boy had clung to his grandfather during the ride back. But by the time they arrived on base, something had shifted. His fear had turned to awe. He wasn't just surrounded by soldiers. He was surrounded by protectors. Big, strong, respectful men who treated his grandpa like royalty. They called him Little Harlan before the night was over. Someone gave him a spare field cap. Another showed him how to polish a boot. One Marine even let him sit in the driver's seat of a Humvee and sound the horn. Eli's eyes lit up with wonder. By the end of the week, Eli had become the unofficial mascot of the battalion. They took turns walking him around the motor pool, teaching him how to stand at attention, letting him help carry light gear during simulations. Tom watched it all with quiet pride. He never said it out loud, but deep down he knew his grandson was safe now, not just in body, but in spirit. Eli had found something special, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of brotherhood. And the world noticed. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW post, where Tom had quietly volunteered for years, saw a spike in new memberships. People who had never stepped foot inside came by just to shake his hand. Donations flooded in. From across the country, anonymous checks, letters, handwritten notes from strangers saying, "Thank you for serving," and "You didn't deserve that." Tom became something more than a veteran. He became a symbol, a reminder that quiet dignity still matters, that true strength doesn't need to shout, that respect isn't earned through noise but through sacrifice. He never gave speeches, never sought interviews. When asked how he felt about going viral, he simply replied, "I'm just glad the boy's okay." But in every Marine's eyes who passed him, every handshake from a teary Vietnam vet, every hug from a child who had never known war but understood injustice, Tom saw what mattered. The Corps remembered. The town remembered. And in doing so, maybe the country started to remember too. Because men like Tom Harlan aren't just relics of the past. They are living proof that honor doesn't retire. It stands. And when it's knocked down, it rises again. Looking back, it's easy to wonder how something like this could have happened. But the truth is, it happens more often than we care to admit. What made this story different wasn't the injustice. It was what followed. Tom Harlan wasn't dressed like a hero. He wasn't flanked by medals or salutes. He wore khakis, a polo shirt, and a worn cap. He held a child's hand. And yet he was more of a protector in that moment than anyone else on that street. When society begins to judge a person's worth by how they look, or worse, by how old they are, we step into dangerous territory. Because not every protector wears a badge. Not every warrior wears a uniform. And not every threat deserves to be met with force. We live in a world that moves too fast, that too often chooses control over conversation. In law enforcement, in classrooms, in politics, in daily life, de-escalation is no longer seen as a strength. But it is. In fact, it may be the last true mark of wisdom. When Officer Mallory drew his taser, he wasn't reacting to a threat. He was reacting to his own discomfort. A man stood before him who didn't immediately submit, who spoke calmly, who protected his grandson. That wasn't resistance. That was dignity. And instead of reading the room, Mallory read the stereotype. Instead of seeing a grandfather, he saw a suspect. Instead of de-escalating, he escalated. and the world watched it unfold. What happened next, the Marines arriving, the helicopter landing, the colonel kneeling, isn't just dramatic storytelling. It's a symbolic moment, a reminder that the bonds of service, of brotherhood, of honor, do not expire when the uniform is hung up. Because Tom Harlan didn't stop being a Marine the day he retired. He simply carried it differently. That's something we must remember in how we treat our veterans, our elders, and even strangers on the street. Valor doesn't disappear with age. Courage doesn't fade with time. And honor, true honor, can't be seen in medals alone. It's seen in how a man stands when accused, how he protects a child, how he forgives. So the question isn't just what happened to Tom Harlan. It's what happens next. Do we continue to judge books by their covers? Or do we start to ask, who is this person really? Because the man you ignore in line at the store might have led soldiers through hell. The woman sitting quietly at the bus stop might have saved lives in uniform. And the grandfather walking hand in hand with a child might just be a living legend. Let's not wait for a helicopter to land before we start treating people with the respect they deserve. Let's get it right the first time. Sometimes it takes a moment like this, a taser, a child's scream, the thunder of helicopters, to remind us what respect should look like. But it shouldn't have to. Tom Harlan didn't need fanfare. He didn't need medals to be seen. All he needed was for someone to look him in the eyes and listen. So today we ask you, not just to remember this story, but to carry its lesson forward. Have we become too quick to judge and too slow to understand? Have we confused silence with weakness or age with irrelevance? Have we forgotten that those who walk softly may carry the heaviest memories? If this story moved you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen dignity mistaken for defiance? Has someone in your life, maybe a parent, a teacher, a veteran, shown strength the world overlooked? We want to hear your stories. Your voices help us honor the ones who walk quietly, yet leave deep footprints behind. And if you believe, like we do, that quiet heroes deserve to be seen, hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more real stories of service, sacrifice, and second chances. And most importantly, share this video with someone who might need a reminder. Respect is not given by rank, it's given by heart. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering Tom Harlan.